Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the Microsoft Teams How to Deploy Teams in a Day webinar. Today, we're lucky enough to have with us Sandy Walker, the Microsoft Global Lead for Microsoft Teams. Hi, Sandy. We're excited to have you here today.
Abby, great to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me along. Okay, hi everyone. So as Abby said, I'm Sandy Walker from Microsoft, and want to take you through the next 30 or 40 minutes around actually how to deploy Teams. And what I'm going to do here is take you through more of a workshop style and coaching session around actually how to have these conversations with your clients. You know, Teams is obviously a super important topic at the moment and very popular and an incredibly busy time for our customers as well, many of whom are kind of working from home or trying to work more remotely. But that will also then lead into kind of a more normalized life coming up soon. So actually kind of Teams will become more and more kind of prevalent in their organizations from a collaboration perspective. So that said, what I want to cover off is a few basics of actually how to talk about, how to have a conversation with your customers about, their architecture, their current environments. And then you can see on the agenda here going through the actual clients they use, the licenses we'll touch on, managing the teams, some network planning, security and compliance, how to organize, the all-important change management and adoption, and a few next steps you can take. So that's kind of what we're going to talk through today. But importantly, what I want to do is actually, you'll see these slides coming up, and they'll say decision point. Now these, we'll be sharing the slides with you, and what we want you to do here at this point is, this is where you have a physical conversation with your customers. So I'm just highlighting this slide at the front here to say that, we will, use these slides. This is for you. Use these slides to have that conversation, drive that conversation with your customers, and it'll make sense when we go through this so you can see actually what we're trying to achieve. Okay, so let's dive in. Right, so first of all, what are we and what are we talking about today? So Teams. I'm hoping that everyone on the call is aware of what Teams is. You've listened to the sales pitch we did at the last session with Abby. But for those that didn't join that session, let me give you kind of the 10-second overview around Microsoft Teams. It really is the hub for teamwork within Microsoft 365. It is that single application and that single solution that combines your chat and collaboration abilities. It's there to help you with calling and meetings, and also with apps and workflows. So what does that mean? So you can see on the screen here, we have an IM conversation going on. So we're collaborating with our teammates. It's just a single place to have a chat and collaborate and share and work together. It's also built within this is a great place to make phone calls or have meetings. You can see on the screen here and some video shots. So it's an all-in-one tool. So we can make phone calls, we can have meetings, meetings internally, schedule meetings, ad hoc meetings, meetings externally, and or live events as well. So we can have thousands of people joining events as well. And then when we think about super value add and the kind of higher end of the value stack, we can also use Teams as a window pane on our customers' work lives, so they can surface up information through this, whether it's a line of business application they use, or whether it's an external application they use. They might use an external CRM tool that they want to bring to life through a single portal or a single solution like Teams, or they can have some workflows highlighted. Maybe they create Power BIs in their organization just to to look at data flows and look at how to they can examine data in a slightly different way. And these things can be integrated and added and surfaced through Teams as well. So it's a great one place to do all pieces of work. So the quick reminder of why we're here around all things Microsoft Teams. Okay, but let's get back to the conversation we're having with your customer around actually where they want to go. So the idea again from today is, what conversation can you have and what do you need to do to drive the conversation or drive the customer in the right direction to make sure they're going to not only buy Teams, but then implement Teams, or you can deploy Teams and implement Teams on their behalf. So let's get started with the first section, which is architecture and the current environment. So the important piece of information to land here with your customers is that during this planning and during these conversations, you have to say exactly what Teams is. So you need to explain what Teams is, how it operates, and the fact that it does touch and sit over so many different aspects of Microsoft 365. And these kind of the touch points really enhance kind of the user's collaborative capabilities. So it's not just that kind of presence and IM tool and that chat tool, it's actually how it can dig in and kind of surface information. So you need to think about the architecture and explain that architecture to your customers as well. So Teams sits on 365, sits on 365 groups. So make sure they're aware of that. If you need more information, by the way, yes, I was going to say, if you need more information through this and the next layer of detail, we do have hyperlinks in here, and we do have speaker notes within the slides as well, which we'll share. And within that, you can then dive into the different areas as well if you need to get a little bit more talk track or a little bit more detail around maybe, for example, there what 365 groups means, so you understand as well. But first and foremost, so it's built on, the reliability and the kind of the performance of Microsoft 365. So the customers are leveraging that and leveraging that security and leveraging that infrastructure. And also from an IT pro perspective, it's going to be easier for them to manage as well once they understand where it all sits together. So set the expectation with the customer that kind of where it sits from an architectural perspective, it sits on 365. So let's go to our first checkpoint. And this is what we want you to then have a conversation about, not only with your customer, but this is great for you as well, because you need to know this stuff as well when you're starting to deploy with your customers. So you can see here, they're pretty straightforward. So I'll pick on a couple of these as examples, but they should all be fairly straightforward. So for example, the first one, has the customer or has your customer already deployed other 365 workloads? The most popular one is Exchange Online, and that's often the first things people move to the cloud. So moving from Exchange on-prem to Exchange Online, that's a very popular one. So have they done something like that, or have they looked at SharePoint Online? Are they maybe existing users of Skype for Business Online, etc.? So have a conversation, work out where they are. Hopefully you've already got that relationship with the customer, so you might have that knowledge to date, which is great. But if not, you can ask the question. And then you can go into the kind of next levels of detail, such as actually, do they have a verified domain? So actually, do they have a domain and do they have their name or their company associated with that domain within 365? So that's kind of that's the naming, that's the address that sits with, that's where the address where all their assets sit within 365, within their tenant. And that the tenant means obviously their section within 365 for their company or their organization. And then do they have things like, Azure Active Directory? So we've heard about Active Directory historically, but obviously Azure is New World Active Directory and more aligned to the kind of the cloud requirements and cloud capabilities. So we're going to find out where these things are. Exchange is important, and I'll come back to why Exchange is important in a moment, but it does have an impact on what capabilities or features that customers may need to look at. And then go into some of the other things like SharePoint or Skype, but we'll cover those off later on. Importantly, on this page as well, you do need to know where your customers are from a license perspective. So actually, first of all, do they have a license? Do they want to buy a license? And I'm sure you can help with that. And if they do have licenses or they don't have licenses, make sure they're going to buy or have the right licenses ready to go to make sure everything's included from a Teams perspective. Pretty much Teams is included in most of the SKUs, but do just have a sanity check as well, because also it might lead to a different conversation around some of the stuff we'll talk about later on, maybe around security and compliance, and the customer might need a different SKU or a different license. So think about those things. So track your answers. So this is your kind of decision point. And likewise, I talked about Exchange. So the one thing I wanted to point out from a planning perspective is if your customers are still on Exchange Online, that's fine. But some things might not work seamlessly or as well if they had Exchange Online. If they were on Exchange on-premise, some things might not work as cleanly or as well if they had Exchange Online. So the slide here shows kind of some of the differences. So, for example, creating the meetings view, or kind of modifying kind of user profile pictures and things. So some things might not work so well or don't work on premise. So if you want to push them to Exchange Online, all the better. But a good checkpoint to ask as well, because we don't want any gotchas or any challenges coming down track. So important ones to think about from an Exchange perspective. Okay, then when we think about SharePoint, if a customer does have SharePoint on premises or a hybrid, you need to explain kind of where Microsoft Teams sits within that. Microsoft Teams does use SharePoint Online and will only utilize SharePoint Online. So that's a good point to make to your clients. If they want to go hard and fast into Teams, then SharePoint Online is going to be required if they want to optimize. If again, they want to optimize all of the kind of the assets and capabilities of Teams, it will use SharePoint Online. And then if they are using kind of OneDrive, then OneDrive for Business will be required for things like private chat files. So again, another question point here. So SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, so do check that they are using those in the right way. But it's fairly straightforward to ask that and then capture that. And then we talked earlier about Skype for Business, and this is more pertinent around Skype for Business Online as well. But if they're using Skype for Business on-prem, it is going to make the conversation a little bit more complicated. And bear in mind also, and it's things are changing with Skype for Business Online. We are retiring Skype for Business Online, I'm sure you're all aware, at the end of July 2021. So in a year and a bit's time from the time of this call, Skype for Business Online will be retired. Skype for Business on-premise will still be there. But anyway, so does complicate, or the Skype for Business conversation does complicate the Teams migration conversation a little bit. Do have to be a little bit more conscious about what they want to achieve and what they want to do, especially if they want to move everything over to Teams, including all the voice assets as well. So you might need to start to look at the different migration strategies. You'll hear of kind of strategies of things like side-by-side or islands mode, or the customer might just want to go big bang, switch Skype off, switch Teams on, and there'll be maybe some downtime there, but you can just flick them over, depending on the size and complexity of the client. But so that's kind of things you can think about. But also important things to think about behind that is simple things. So what PSTN access do they have? Are they wanting to look at calling plan? Do they use have an on-site SBC, or just how do they approach the whole PSTN access? Think about that. Think about what features they use. I mean, do they have some unusual features that they use within Skype that would need to be replicated or not replicated, or that conversation needs to be had about certain features that may or may not appear within Teams, because it's not feature parity. There are differences between them. And the last point I was going to make here is that the Skype for Business migration plan is a complicated one. We'd probably fill 4 or 5 hours of a webinar around that if you wanted to go into the real detail. So the last comment here is there is a lot of information and a lot of support for you from Microsoft online around all things kind of migration. So that includes, there's lots of comprehensive guides, how to get started, how to have a conversation, whether it's technical guidance, whether it's planning resources. We've got proven success frameworks that you can follow, best practices, and all of all the planning documents. Also behind that, there are lots of lots of free of charge trainings, or there's instructor-led paid trainings as well available out in the market if you wanted to get fully more trained up as well. And then depending on the size of the client, they may be eligible for fast track support as well. So bear that in mind. So if the customer is of the right size, there might be some fast track support as well available to you or the client around the kind of migrations as well. So fairly straightforward. So we talked about some of the questions you can ask there. So Skype for Business does add a layer of complexity from a migration perspective, but don't be frightened. There's lots of support there to help you. Okay. So the next next conversation I want you to have then with your customers is around the actual clients they use. So what I mean by this is kind of what are they using to look at Teams, pretty much. So are they going to use a web interface? Are they going to be desktop users, or are they going to be predominantly mobile users? The reason for asking this is then you can start to have the conversation around kind of what's the experience they can expect, what's the experience they want to achieve, what's the experience they kind of they want to give their users within that organization. And pretty much, kind of from across all these different interfaces, they're all pretty much the same. Historically, there might have been, there might not have been feature parity between maybe the mobile experience or the desktop experience, but pretty much everything is the same. I mean, I am, obviously a great advocate and user of Teams. Abby, who's hosting the call today, we chat a lot over Teams, but actually half the time when I chat to Abby, she might not realize I'm on my mobile. I might be sharing, I might be sharing an application or sharing a PowerPoint with her, but I'm doing it on my mobile. So the experience is rich, the experience is fantastic. And when you're having these conversations, do make sure you're demoing this as well. So it's not only about deploying it, but keep reminding people about the power of Teams. So, you might be speaking to different people who aren't experienced in the kind of and the utilization of Teams. So, keep demoing it. So, but first and foremost around this slide, find out what experience they want, so then you can plan for that. It doesn't really matter, but you can plan for it moving forwards. So, obviously from a desktop perspective, that's easy for everyone. And then you can start to talk about, start to talk about kind of the right desktop, the right capability, etc. from a device perspective. We won't cover that off today, but you can have that conversation yourselves with them. So, do capture that information. So, are there any restrictions? Are they using devices that might not work? So another decision point here. So good check and balance. And then, and when you work out what those restrictions may be, then you can find out how they want to deploy it. And what I mean again by deploying this one is on that client. So are we doing it on a kind of you're doing full desktop clients, or are they going to use the web interface? As long as you know, then you can have the conversation and you can plan for that as well. Okay. So let's move on to then slightly more detail now around actually kind of managing the teams. So where we want to get here is not to scare you, or actually quite the opposite. I do not want to scare you in any way, because actually kind of from an admin perspective and a rollout perspective, Teams is kind of a modern app. It's lightweight, it's easy, it's been designed, and all the kind of the admin features and portals behind it have been designed to make life as easy as possible for you or your customer. We're presuming it's you doing this for them, but maybe the customer's doing it themselves. So it's certainly it's very lightweight perspective, very lightweight from a management or management burden perspective for IT admins or IT pros. So, but first and foremost, it's important to think about, kind of who's going to do this. So when you do things like, using, kind of Azure Active Directory, when I mentioned that earlier on, you can designate, within your customer site, who does what. From what I mean by that is, think about who has control. So when we have administrators on your client side, that's the person who can manage the complete Teams workload. Then you may have other delegated levels of authority behind that. But generally, kind of the Teams admin has access to everything and control of everything, and then they can tier that back. So you have other admin rights, or other people who have other admin levels, and they might have more restricted access. So think about that, have that conversation with them around the right administrator roles to manage the teams. That hyperlink there on the page takes you to a guide of who does what and what they have the capability of doing. So have that conversation about ultimately where do you want that to go. If it's a managed service, fine, you're going to manage that on their behalf, but maybe the customer wants to do that as well. So once you do that, kind of obviously with your think about from a licensing perspective, you might want to think about how, who has this, who has the features, who has the full functionality, and you might need to look at kind of actually how you push this out through the organization. We try and let teams grow organically, but we do want to encourage, we'll come back to this point, so I will remind you of this. So when we start rolling this out and switching it on, we do tend to advise that we just let it go. There is some best practice we'll come back to later on, but kind of let it go, let it grow organically, but it's great to get some champions within that end customer organization as well to help kind of push that. And so they can be your super users. And you may want to empower those users with a slightly different look and feel, or slightly different kind of rollout plans. But you can do that kind of with your customer and in collaboration with your customer. But you do need to follow up. That's the main thing here around actually when you roll it out. Don't just switch it on and roll it out and run away. Stay with the client. Stay with the client and make sure you are kind of making sure that they are optimized, trained, and they're looking at that adoption. As I say, we'll come back to that later on. So when we think about the service admin, key thing on this page is think about who the admin is from that customer site. Once you think about who the admin is, then we start thinking about actually what do you want to roll out. And it's, as I said, this is lightweight, this is easy. Here's a screenshot of the admin center, and it really is as simple as that. If I could do it, anyone on this phone call could do it. And so once you go to the dashboard around the admin center, you have full control about what you're going to switch on, what you're going to switch off. Why do I say that? Because you might want to have a conversation with the customer about actually what you're switching on day one. Are you switching on everything? So all the bullet points on the left-hand side there. So, thinking about kind of who has the right to, create teams, create meetings. Generally, most people let everyone do things, but you may have reasons to then limit that, or you may have other reasons to limit some things, such as they may not have voice activated, they may not have a conference calling plan. So you may some things might be switched on or switched off because they haven't bought it yet. But good to have that conversation. So it's just kind of follow the guides and follow the click down boxes around actually kind of who has what and who has control of what as well. So our simple example being within meetings there is a control of, are you going to let the end users do screen sharing? You have that control, or your customer has that control. So you need to have that conversation with them about what they want to switch on. As I say, and I'll repeat quite a few things on this call, most people switch everything on and then they may switch it back off. Other people have a very limited rollout or switch on policy, and then they start to switch things on as time goes on, when they feel their users are more confident and more comfortable with using it, or they trust the users more. So it's up to you. But basically, it's a very simple plan of actually how to go to the Teams admin center and switch things on. When you start to think about the management of it, everything is kind of at an end user level. From a Teams perspective, it's actually organized through the client. So from a Teams creation perspective, the individual user will generally control this. And so they can create a team, they can create owners of that team and members of a team, and that's handled, as I say, by the end user, assuming they are allowed, which we recommend they are. Bear in mind, behind that scenes, anyone who has that permission to create that group behind the scenes, or has a permission to create a group, is also enabled for Teams as well. And so that's just bear that in mind in case that's a concern for anyone. But that's fairly normal behind the scenes. So don't be concerned, but have that as a reminder to yourself to think about that. And also, all the users with a mailbox and Exchange Online will have the ability to create a 365 group as well. So just a couple of the rule sets behind here, just to make sure that you can think about that and/or remind the customer if need be. Okay, and then in managing teams, first checkpoint here, another checkpoint here around actually kind of the management structure. What is that? So this is again your takeaway slide on this mini section. So what is your kind of customer's plan for Teams onboarding? Are they going to do it, kind of across the organization? Are they going to do a pilot? If they're going to do a pilot, who are they going to do a pilot with? What features or settings are they going to switch on? So we've talked through what some of those are from the kind of admin console, so you can have that conversation. And on the previous slide, you saw some of the feature sets that you can have that conversation about. So what is your customer going to switch on? What are they going to allow? Again, I'll say it again, we recommend try everything. And then who within that organization will be able to create teams, whether that's again at the pilot stage or the full rollout stage. So ask the question. Again, we think everyone should, because it's good to let everyone to be enabled to use this, allow everyone to work collaboratively. The only point I'll say, and I'll come back to it later on, is around governance. So we need to start thinking about governance for day 2, day 3, but we'll cover that off in a few moments. So then the other things, and this is your checklist around kind of the managing of those teams. So some basic things here. I won't run through the whole list, but kind of what do you want them to receive and what do you want them to do? So something as easy as kind of calls and meetings. Are you going to allow your users to schedule private meetings, schedule meetings within a channel? Are you going to allow video? Some people don't allow video simply because of infrastructure requirements. We'll come back to that later on about kind of network assessments and things and kind of best practice around that. But some people don't allow video simply because of kind of whether it may be a cultural reason, it may be an infrastructure reason. But you need to ask the question. Some people are nervous around screen sharing. Screen sharing is obviously very secure, with things like DLP built in and data loss prevention, things coming through on the right licenses. It's so very secure. So we again recommend you do allow these things. And then obviously on that previous point around video, That's been a huge uptake of video in kind of recent times, with all the kind of the challenging times being in and all the remote working, and it's been a real differentiator for a lot of people at a personal level as well. So feel free to have that conversation about, actually, do you want to empower, include, embrace people, embrace their employees, make sure they feel part of that team. Video is an important part of that message as well. Bit of a fun one in the messaging. Some people do allow Giphies, some don't. We do allow them here at Microsoft, and we have a bit of fun. So if you're sending a nice note to somebody and have a bit of fun, you can add a Giphy to a conversation. But some people don't like that. And likewise, you can do other things like content ratings, etc. So lots of controls, but you need to have the conversation, up front. So when you do switch it on and deploy this, there are no surprises. The idea behind this checklist, and then all the checklists, are that you're planned, you've had the conversation, and there's no surprises. Okay, so that's managing teams. Oops, sorry, don't know what happened there. Sorry about that. Let me just go back, and then again, the last point on managing teams. I do apologise for that, for my mouse jumping. Whether you want to then allow some other added extras. For those that don't know, so you can build bots straight into Teams. It's a really effective tool, and also then allowing for users to add tabs. So an example of that is on one of the very first early slides. I used the example of a Power BI tab, and that was a kind of a tab being posted to the front page of a team site, which links directly to a Power BI report or another resource. It may be a spreadsheet, it may be a document, it might be a web link. So can the users add tabs or bots? Again, good conversation to have. Okay, organizing teams. So what we're going to do here then is actually move into kind of, well, who does what, who has the ability to do what. So we talked about teams and channels and kind of who does that. So we need to think about kind of memberships and roles. So who can do what? Who is an owner? Who is a member? So when you give permissions around this, it's a case of who within that organization is allowed to create or is responsible for the kind of the settings across a team, and the setting the memberships as well, including all the invitations to the memberships of teams as well. So that's somebody who owns a team. And then the team members is somebody who's a member of that. They can't necessarily invite people. They can interact with people, but they can't invite people to that team. So when you have a conversation with a customer, have that conversation around actually kind of who does what. And the idea again is that to make sure that kind of that customer is understanding what that team is. Bear in mind, I think we all know this, but it's designed to bring everyone together, bring that group of people together to work more closely to get those things done. And that owner is going to be in charge of that team. They could be, it could be a dynamic team, it could be project based. Whether you're going back to the previous webinar we did, so is that kind of a marketing campaign, a sales campaign? It might be different teams and things, or different teams or different people you are putting together, and then all of your collaborative work is done in that area. So that's kind of at a team level and those members of it. I think you're all aware as well from a channel perspective. Again, the owner would be able to create those channels within the team, and then the channel helps create the conversations within that area. So it might be a specific topic or a specific area within that team. So if you have a sales team, it might be a campaign channel, it might be a sales incentive channel, it might be a training channel. So then you have channels within that team to enable kind of the conversation to flow and that collaborative working to set place or to take place. So think about kind of who the owners are and kind of who has control of the owners in the organization. And then when you think again about your pilot or about your rollout, if you are doing a pilot, well, think about who's going to do it. Is it going to be an IT pilot, or is it going to be some super users? So just have that conversation. So another checkpoint for you. What are you going to do, and are you going to set this up for them? And so if you're going to set it up for them, kind of which members you want to bring, what controls you want to give them, and who are you going to add to kind of either the teams or the channels to actually, so that it can make sure they can use it and you can roll it out or pilot it properly. So another quick decision point around, when you go live, ask your customers who's doing what and who's going to do it from either a pilot perspective or a full rollout perspective. Okay, so I said we touch on network planning. This is very important, and we've seen this becoming even more important in recent years, especially with the amount of pervasive video that's going on, just to get some of the basics under control. So when we think about, kind of network planning, think about everything. It's not just about the wide area network or their broadband link or their well, not ISDN, but their kind of their whatever kind of SDSL or ADSL link or their broadband link or their WAN link that they have. Think about everything else. Think about their Wi-Fi. Ask the questions. Is their Wi-Fi strong enough to cope with, kind of users using different devices? Maybe it's a mobile, maybe it's a laptop. So think about that. Or are they all hardwired in? You may also want to think about different sides of the conversation around actually things like peripherals. So actually, if they're going to start to use Teams, and this is a big challenge recently of, kind of people starting to use Teams and then working remotely, they might not have the best devices. So is it, do they need to think about, a speakerphone, a headset, maybe a different camera because their, laptop or desktop doesn't have a suitable camera? So, so do expand the conversation around network planning, not just around the physicals, but also some of the peripherals as well. So think about that as well. But back on the kind of network traffic side of things, think about this in, kind of the main areas here about the three forms of traffic. So the data on Microsoft Teams will travel between the Office 365 or the Microsoft 365 cloud, and it will transverse some kind of connectivity and then touch the end users, either into the organization or across, as I say, a kind of wide area or a broadband link. This is used for all of that signaling, all the traffic, and in some cases, kind of the point-to-point. In some cases, some of the traffic for maybe video or voice. But there's things. Some of the traffic flows go in different directions at different times, depending on the type of flow it is. What I mean by that is, most of the traffic that goes between the end user and the data center is generally just signaling and presence information and/or physical files that you are connecting to, or if you're sucking information from other sources, such as via your tabs or connectors. Most traffic from a peer-to-peer perspective, so when you're having a phone call or doing a video call, that generally goes point to point. So it doesn't kind of trombone, as we say, back to the data center back. So that goes point to point. And likewise with conferencing. Conferencing is also real time, so that goes kind of point to point, as opposed to being tromboned through the data center as well. So when you think that's kind of a couple of hints there to have a conversation, or if people ask you about kind of is it going to destroy their bandwidth? Not necessarily, because most of it's peer to peer, and the small bandwidth amount, or the small bandwidth requirements are then going to the data center and back. You do want to then think about, though, actually kind of the sizing of the network and sizing of the LAN, and especially when you think about actually kind of what, kind of how many users are going to be. And so when you think about that, we do have some hints and tips for you here. So we've got a bandwidth calculator. Feel free to then look at this one. It gives you some of the basics around actually kind of, it's pretty much a paper, what I would call a paper-based network audit or assessment. So it gives you kind of very good, strong estimations around what the requirements are, the number of users, types of users, what type of traffic they'll be expecting, and so you can size bandwidth and size bandwidth requirements around that. If you wanted to get to the nth degree, yes, you might need to go and do a full network assessment or a full network audit. It's probably not necessary for small clients, but some big clients will need it. And that's when you can go and do a full assessment on their kind of infrastructure and do a full calculations around kind of bandwidth requirements, LAN requirements, Wi-Fi requirements, etc., to make sure it's all scaled properly for the requirements. So do use that kind of bandwidth calculator from that link there to get a good indication of what is what from a bandwidth perspective. And again, your decision point here. So when you have your conversation with the customers, think about what they want to do. So actually, what are they doing? Are they going to support? Is the network going to support real-time media, so audio, video, and desktop sharing? And if it's not particularly well scaled and it's not optimized, then the end user experience will be diminished. And this will have knock-on effects of not only kind of, end user satisfaction, but also when we think about, and we'll come back again to things like user adoption rates will be low. The employee experience is bad. They won't bother using it. They won't bother coming back. So we need to make sure things are optimized, or at least we're calling it out. So your checklist and your conversation with the customer is, we don't necessarily think that the network scale properly. We recommend you do this, or we recommend you do that. It also means you are armed to have a slightly different conversation with your customer as well. So do think about it, because we don't want to impact that user experience. Okay, so let's touch on some of the security and compliance conversations you need to have. Again, going back to, I do apologize for my mouse jumping there. So coming back to security. So reminder again, so Teams is built on 365, on Microsoft 365. It leverages the rich authentication options offered by the platform. And it does align to the existing 365 Azure Active Directory authentication policies. Those three kind of policies are, cloud identity, synchronized identity, and federated identity. So they are the main identity aspects for this. What that means is, cloud identity represents kind of the users being homed in Azure Active Directory. So that's kind of for them. From a synchronized identity perspective, that's where on-premise accounts are synced to the cloud via Azure Active Directory sync, or with a password sync. So authentication on synchronized identity still happens in the cloud. And then the third option from a identity perspective is federated identity. What that means is that the identity is represented by having an ADFS deployment, which has access to the Office 365 service, and then we'll kind of redirect the ADFS deployment on premises for authentication and authorization. So you've got three models here from an authentication perspective. So have the conversation around actually which scenario is going to suit your customer, depending on where they are from an authorization perspective. If they're, if it's fairly simple and they're Azure Active Directory, then it's easy because it's cloud identity. And then the other point to discuss as well is kind of other authentication routes as well. So things like MFA or multi-factor authentication, and whether that's going to be switched on. Some people do that from an admin-only perspective, or other organizations are now switching on multi-factor authentication by default as well. It's becoming the new norm. Some people don't like it from an end-user experience perspective, but have the conversation about what the customer wants to do from a MFA or multi-factor authentication perspective. Okay, when we talk about compliance, this is where I refer back to one of the comments made at the start of the call around, again, it's a conversation you need to have around where they are, what they want to achieve from a compliance perspective. The reason I say that is some compliance and security features are only available in higher end SKUs or licenses. So for the full security stack, or the full, for example, e-discovery stack or capability, your customers need to have an E5 SKU. If they don't have that, then it's kind of a scaled back compliance and security capability. But I want you to have the conversation around actually what is required. So actually things that when you talk about things like when you turn on at the basic level, kind of you need to turn a lot of the stuff on, and you can turn it on at a tenant level. When you turn it on at a tenant level, it does take time for these things to come through. So there might be a 24-hour lag between switching on and seeing reports or seeing the impact. But just to bear that in mind, it's not an instant thing. So there is a time lag between switching this on a tenant and seeing the results. But have that conversation around actually what do they want to achieve. So they've got a lot of stuff out of the box. So things like kind of the activities and logs and everything else is available through, and those activities and events are available through kind of the audit log search. And then when you go up the value stack to things like compliance content search, so actually you can search for content for specific contents or using specific tags, and look for things in specific containers within Teams. You don't necessarily have to have e-discovery for that type of thing. So there's a lot of some great security and compliance features out of the box. So again, have the conversation about what's available to them. You'll see what's available from the admin center when you switch these things on. So don't think you're going to get confused by being bamboozled. It's not, you can see what they have and what they don't have, but it's a great chance to have another conversation about that upsell or cross-sell, maybe to a higher level security tool or a solution or kind of compliance features such as e-discovery. So you can, again, have that conversation about what needs to be added in and what needs to be switched on. But you can, again, do all that kind of for your client, or they can do it themselves through the admin portal. Okay, and then, so again, decision point. So what are they needing to do? So this is where you take your, again, the checklist for the decision point. What do they need? What are they going to switch on? What are they not going to switch on? So you've got a view on kind of what the capabilities are. And as I mentioned there on the previous slide of, kind of that upsell, cross-sell opportunity, they may not have the right license for what they need. Or they may decide against it. So, but have that conversation, and do they have the right license for what they physically need or for what they physically want? A subtle but important difference between what they need and what they want. But obviously, we want to encourage our customers to be as secure and as compliant as possible. Okay, we've mentioned this a couple of times. So, adoption change management. So, yes, you can switch it on. Yes, you can deploy teams. But if you don't get people using it, then they won't get the benefit from it. We'll have lots of different conversations, or you may have lots of different conversations with that end customer around derived value, return on investment, and everything else. But actually, if we do start with some of the basics around adoption change management, then we can negate some of these. We'll probably provide a great end user experience, great value, and a great return on investment for our customers. There's a lot of information around adoption change management. We've published a lot of information, but here I'm just going to talk through, kind of a few minutes of some of the basics. So do have a conversation, do have a strategy for change management and for adoption, even if it's the most basic thing around having a communications plan or a training plan. Make sure you have something. Make sure people are aware of what's going on in your customer's base. It's designed in a way to grow organically. It's designed to be super easy for end users to understand it and roll it out and use it. But if you add to that a bit of thought, a bit of process, then you can really accelerate the results. So having a well thought out plan is fantastic. Even having a half thought out plan is fantastic. So do the basics, you'll see the impact. If you do the basics and do it again and have a stronger plan, then you'll see amazing results. So as it says in the bottom bullet point there, it'll decrease the amount of time it takes. You'll increase the kind of employee satisfaction, and you'll see significant growth rates over time. Not because you are forcing people to use it, because people want to use it and they understand why they're wanting to use it. So that's the important thing. They want to use it and understand how to use it. Some simple things. And this is a really basic version of some of the adoption plans. As I say, we've got a lot of information out there. So think about actually who that exec sponsor is. Maybe less important when it's a really small organization of 10 people or 20 people. But actually, when you start getting, it might be important at that level. But when you start getting beyond that, have somebody in that customer site who's going to say, I've decided to do this, and this is why we're doing it, and this is why I want you to believe in it. This is what I want you to do. Then you can get some champions. So they're the power users or the super users to then kind of go and further promote the idea. They can do your hard work for you. So they're your champions within the network. Obviously, you need to get the IT department and IT professionals on board, whether that's from a support perspective or whether from just actually kind of another super user perspective. So get those teams on board. And then can look at your pilot groups. You may want to go big bang or have a pilot first. We'd recommend having a pilot just to see how it works. And then you can maybe test and validate some of your adoption plans or training plans with those pilot groups to make sure that it's all going to be kind of optimized as well. So some simple ideas there about people you get to see. And then so some recommended steps. Again, this is really simple stuff. And actually kind of what are your key stakeholders? Who are they? What are the business outcomes? Actually, what are they trying to achieve? Obviously, at the moment, a lot of that is just get my employees working, get them working remotely because they have to be at home. We've had to shut the office, had to shut the facility. Actually get them active, get them working on something. So actually, that might just be the business requirement today. That will change. So think about that change coming down track around what that business outcome is or business requirement is. Think about your campaign. What is it? What is the messaging you're putting out with it? So why are you doing it? Why is it important? What you want the staff to do? What the expectations are, and then go back as well. So, make sure you go back and, kind of get feedback from them, and then fine tune and adjust those messages. Think about your champions programs, think about your champions network, about those super users. Do you get feedback? It's again, the employee experience is really improved when people have a route to feedback. That could be a team site, that could be a Teams chat channel, or a channel within the team site around actually kind of feedback from the rollout. But do get the feedback, because people want to be included. If they feel included, they will be much more successful. And then obviously kind of measure the results, measure the success, and then if you need to, kind of adjust moving forwards. Okay, so again, decision point. Again, this is your checklist, as ever, through this presentation, around your checklist to have that conversation with the customer. So what is your change management strategy, or your adoption strategy, or even your training strategy at the most basic level? Who are your sponsors? How are you going to influence those people? Who are your users? How are you going to train them, and how are you going to communicate with them? So it's a really simple conversation to have with your customer. If you have that conversation with those 6 points, you're halfway home, because then they understand what they need to achieve as well, and they understand what the impact could be. So really good decision point there, and good conversation to have. Okay, so let's think about the next stage around actually, now we've got it going, we've got the employees thinking, got the employees understanding what they want to do, and they're using the tools. Actually, then how do we deliver and operate this? So from a deliver and operate perspective, I want you as the kind of our partners looking to manage the customers, but actually kind of what do you need to do. So this is more of kind of straight into the checklist, or actually what you need to do to actually deliver this team. So let's kind of go back over some of these things. So actually, from a preparation perspective, are you ready? And this is first and foremost across all of these decision points around that delivery teams. Are you ready? Is your customer ready to actually kind of take teams, deploy teams, and roll teams out? So think about those prerequisites. We talked about networking. We talked about the kind of the infrastructure. So think about the physicals around teams. Think about your verification. Think about your authentication. So actually, can people physically get to teams? How do they authenticate, and how do they physically get to the network? Think about the kind of your user enablements. So actually, what are you enabling for your customers? So actually, what functionality are you switching on? So think about that. We've talked about that. Think about your people. So what roles, permissions, and what are they allowed to do in these environments? So another checkpoint there, right? Actually, what the physical end users are allowed to do. Where are they doing it? What clients? So we talked about the desktop, or talked about your kind of web clients or the mobile. Think about that. Deployment. So mobile device management. Are they needing to do that? Are they going to be mobile only? Or is that small? Is that a kind of SMB customer with only mobiles, or is it they got some kind of first line or front line workers that they might need to think about some security aspects? So from a device perspective, mobile and others. So think about that, about actually, and is it kind of optimized for teams? And then are you going to allow them to do, first of all, allow them to look at extensibility? We talked about tabs and connectors and bots and things. So first of all, are you going to allow them to do that? Or actually, are you going to do that for them, another value-add service? Are there some connectors or some bots that your customer needs? You can help them with that kind of stuff. And then that enablement side of things as well around security and compliance. So actually, what are you going to lock down? What are you going to, what is their security policy, and what are you going to configure so your customer adheres to their policies, assuming they have them? If not, you can help them with the creation of that kind of security policy. And then think about into the future. So actually, how are they going to run this? Are you running it for them? Is it a managed service? Or are you going to help their service desk run this? Or they've just got a person who kind of manages IT. So how are you going to think about kind of how do you run the process, and how do you run the program and run the service? So what's your general approach for for troubleshooting? What's your general approach for guidance? What's your approach going to be for taking a ticket or taking a phone call? So think about these things. Obviously, I can't answer these because it's going to be different for every one of your clients and different for every one of you on the call. But think about that. Think about your approach and what that is, or is it you doing it, or is somebody else doing it? And then think about again the next stage on. So it's not only kind of compliance for today, but think about compliance for tomorrow as well. So actually, what else can they do? And also, when I think about tomorrow, and we talk about tomorrow, what else does your customer want to do moving forwards around actually kind of not just security and compliance, but teams all up? Okay, So that was a whirlwind tour through deployment of a day. So kind of hints, tips, guides around actually what you need to do, how you do it, and what your checklists are meant to do. Obviously, as I said, you'll get the slides, and those slides include those checklists. Those checklists are your to-do list. They are your conversations, and they are your plan of action, and actually kind of deploying teams in a day. Obviously, you can deploy a lot quicker. But you can with the conversation and everything else, and to do it properly, take a bit of time, have a good conversation, put a bit of thought into it with your client. You can switch it on and run away. We certainly don't recommend that. We would recommend you switch it on with thought, planning, and with some kind of premeditated plans around actually what you ultimately want to achieve. So I hope that was useful. So hopefully now Abby's still with us, and she'll be able to run us through a few resources for you to help you with other aspects. Abby.
Thank you so much, Sandy. That was phenomenal. As we sit here and we're listening to this webinar, it's really important to know that you're not going at it alone as well. Here at Ingram, we're here to help you make sure and enable you with all of the resources for helping your customers be successful. Feel free to reach out to your account manager at Ingram, or you can reach out directly to myself as well, as I'm the subject matter expert here at Ingram. And also very fortunate to have a team at Microsoft, including Sandy, to help support your business. Some additional resources that we have available from a marketing perspective are our Microsoft On-Ramp. Out on Microsoft On-Ramp, you're going to be able to find demo environments. Chorus Hub is for marketing. It's really plug and play. We have our Ingram Micro Cloud Marketplace, and then Microsoft Docs will become your Bible. Out there, you will be able to find anything you need in relation to how to deploy teams. Once this has been distributed, you will also receive the slide deck that Sandy showed today. And again, feel free to reach out with questions. Thank you so much, and have a great day.